morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. It is really my pleasure to be with all of you, and I very much enjoyed the talks to this point and the singing as well. And part of the discussion that I thought was very helpful is this whole issue of God at work and really working for the glory of God. And what I thought I would do, and I'll try to do it very informally, is rather than having a big speech and having PowerPoint slides, I'll give you a couple of thoughts on this, and then I'd love to open it up and we can really have more of a dialogue than just a monologue. I find that to be somewhat helpful. And the way I always mention this to students and executives is that I have very, very few answers. Very few answers, but like everybody in this room, I have many opinions, okay? So I never do Q&A, question and answer. I do a lot of Q&O, question and opinion. And I'll give you my opinion on a couple of things and some things that I think as Christians at our work we're definitely called to do. And thinking about how to do that in a practical way, I think is one of the challenges. So the way I think about this is that no matter what area you're in, no matter what you do, if you look at the world today, we desperately need more leaders, right? I mean, I won't get into a lot of the insanity that's going on, but you think about almost every day, you see a lack of leaders, and I think a lack of thinking of, what would Christ ask us to do? And I think because we're human and we see a lot of this going on, you see a lot of the insanity going on, there's usually a perspective of, somebody really needs to change this. Somebody really needs to make a positive impact. But it's interesting, many times in groups, when we talk about all the things that need to happen, whether it's in Washington or whatever, the usual reaction is the group of people that are going to change these things have a very given name. No matter where you are, these people get referred to as the people that are going to make the change is this group of people called those guys. Now, this is a gender-neutral term, right? Those guys, but it's a very, very big group of people, right? But it's usually somebody else, right? It's they've got to do it. They've got to change this, and somebody's got to. And this whole discussion of those guys. And what I always try to remind us, particularly as Christians, and I think of the previous discussion, we are those guys, right? If we're not the men and women that are going to change the way things are, I don't think it's going to change. And while everybody is pessimistic or concerned or going around in circles, I actually believe that that's something that Jesus asks us to do. He asks us to do that. And part of God at work, I think, is stepping up to realize I'm not going to be looking for somebody else. I'm going to look at myself. I'm going to look at myself. And there's challenges in that. How we do that becomes very important. But I think that realization that somebody needs to do it, and I'm not going to keep looking for somebody else, right? I'm going to do it. And since I realize I can't do it alone, I'm going to pray. I'm going to reflect enough. I'm going to find people. The importance of gatherings like this is that I wouldn't want you to leave a gathering like this without at least being able to meet every other person in the room, because these are the people that are going to give you the strength to help get done what we need to get done, right? And it's because you can't do it alone, but you can't wait for somebody else. So this whole idea in my mind of we've really got to focus on leadership and how we become Christian leaderships. Now, one of the interesting things I think is we're all very busy, right? We got a million things to do, right? We're either continuing to work, we're going to school, we got a million things going on. And if you're as conscientious as the folks in this room, the usual reaction is when you realize I may not be able to get everything done, right? How can I literally get the work done, my continued training done, spend time with my family, my friends, get a little bit of exercise, try to make a real difference. And if you're as conscientious as all of you, the usual way people think about that is, well, I'll just go faster and faster, right? I'll just start to multitask. And because we've got all these great devices, we got Blackberries, Blueberries, iPhones, iPads, we have all this stuff, all these devices, which I actually believe the view was, well, this will actually make us all more productive. I've spent enough time thinking and writing about this that I don't necessarily think these things make us more productive. It makes us more active, Right? We're very, very active, right? We take a break for 20 minutes. Oh, there's a break for 20 minutes, so rather than reflecting or praying, I can cruise through another 30 emails, 55 text messages. I'm very active, but how productive are we, right? Or are we moving so fast, we don't really know whether we're productive, okay? We don't have time to figure that out. Let's just keep moving. And I think one of the things we have to do as to becoming Christian leaders is we really need to take the time to self-reflect and pray. Right? And when I say self-reflect and pray, in order to do that, I think you have to turn off all the devices. You got to get off by yourself. You got to find someplace really quiet and really ask yourself a couple, I think, pretty serious questions. Now, there's different ways you can ask these questions. They come in different forms. But the types of questions I encourage Christian leaders to ask themselves are questions like this. What are my values? What is the purpose Jesus has asked me for? No kidding around. What really matters? What really matters? What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of a leader does Jesus expect me to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people? Now, I have to be very honest with you. I can't focus on these questions when I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. I just can't do it. But I will tell you, taking a little bit of time to think about this, a little bit of time to pray about it, helps me separate activity and productivity. It helps me prioritize what I really be focusing on, right? And I think being able to do that is the first step, Because without prayer, without the Bible, without thinking about this, I don't think it's possible. Now, when I said we can be very open and we can chat about these things, the first reaction I get often, and you may be thinking about this, is, well, this sounds really great. I mean, spending some time, more time in prayer and reflection would be helpful, but I just don't have the time. I mean, I got so many things going on, I just don't think I can carve out the time. And my challenge is that we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do? See, because this could get very sensitive very quickly, right? There could be a pretty big difference between what we say is important and what we're actually doing, and that could be too close to home, right? That could get us a little on edge. But we're talking about leadership, right? Leaders are willing to challenge themselves. Leaders are willing to put themselves up. That's what leaders do. Right? And if folks say we don't have the time, that's sort of interesting because most of us try to commute someplace, try getting around this city, right? Some of us try to exercise every day. You could do this while you're meditating, praying, reading the Bible. Just taking a little bit of time to think about this has an enormous impact, And I think by doing that, then as I do my work, as I do my job, I can actually say, all right, well, what do I really believe God really is asking me to do? Now, because we live in such a secular world, right, and we have to be sensitive, we got to be careful. Oh boy, how do I do that? You mentioned, on your screensaver, boy, what if somebody's going to think? Here's another one that I feel strongly about, and we can challenge this and debate this, but that's why I always say opinions. There's very often, and I saw this when I was running Baxter Healthcare, I see this now in many, many companies, there's always this view of, okay, all right, we believe very strongly in our faith, but we need to be sensitive to everybody. And, there are people that may not be Christians, they may not have any spiritual life at all, and I need to be really sensitive to those. So, I know what I need to do. I kind of need to separate this, right? I'm going to be very, very focused when I'm not at work. I'll be very focused on Christ and his teachings in the evening or on Sundays, but I have to kind of separate this, right? I got to separate this church-state thing, right? Well, I have a slight problem with that because if we're Christian and we're really called to follow Christ, I don't know how you can separate that. I mean, it's because it's actually part of who you are. How do you separate that out? Now, the way I think about it is I will definitely be respectful. I will be respectful of people with other faiths. I think Christ would want me to be respectful of other people. But if it's who I am, people are going to find that out. They're going to know that, right? I'm not going to throw it in their face. But to me, one of the best things that I can do with my faith at work is to be a great example. So I'll give you some examples. If Bob is my boss, and Bob's not Christian, and Bob says to me, hey, Harry, we got to finish this project. I got to have this project by Monday, so we'll work on it on Sunday. In a very nice way, I'm going to say, hey, Bob, my work is very important. I appreciate the fact you're compensating me for that. I'll tell you what, you tell me what you need at 7 o'clock Monday morning. It'll be on your desk, okay? But you know what, Bob? I'm not going to be working on Sunday, all right? I may do it Friday night. I may come in Saturday, but Sunday's not a day I'm going to be working. But I will deliver what you need. I will make sure that happens, right? And if there's an event at work and everybody's going to go out and, everybody is going to get drunk or whatever, you know what? Hey, I want to be part of the team, but you know what? I'll have a Diet Coke, but, I have no need to do that, but I'm going to participate. And if that's something you want to do, that's okay, right? So I actually think if it's part of who you are, the example you set has an enormous impact. Right? In my classes at Northwestern, I always quote Andrew Carnegie, who was a steel executive many, many years ago. And I love one of his comments. He said, the older I get, the less I listen to what people say, the more I watch what they do. I don't think we realize sometimes the unbelievable example we can have for other people. It's truly remarkable, right? If you're at work and you've got a time to take a break, and you're sitting in the cafeteria, and you happen to be reading something from one of the Gospels, and somebody walks up to you, how are you doing? Oh, this is what I happen to be reading. But you know what? What are you reading? What are you doing? So again, it's not throwing it in someone's face, but it's making clear, wow, look at the way that person lives their life. Boy, they seem to have much more calm. They're not racing around like lunatics. What are they doing that I could learn from? Right? And I really believe that being an example, you can attract so many people, right? Now, part of the challenge, though, is because we've got so much to do, that in addition to being self-reflective and prayerful, you have to figure out somehow to balance everything, right? Because when you think about all the things you're trying to balance, your job, your family, your spirituality, your health, making a difference. You have all these things, and very often somebody will say to me, Harry, I'll be very honest, I'm having trouble balancing things. I got so many things going on, it's hard for me to balance all these things. But what I find is that often many people that are having trouble balancing their lives have not been self-reflective enough to figure out what they're trying to balance. And the way I think about it is, if you haven't figured out what's really important, right? If you haven't really figured out what is Christ asking you to do, I think it's almost impossible to balance things, right? And that's why I think it all literally starts with self-reflection and prayer. What is he calling me to do? Which, if you're not taking the time to pray about it and think about it, in my mind, it's almost impossible to do. Almost impossible to do. And I love the way the prior speaker talked about work as something that is really for the glory of God, right? And it doesn't really matter in my mind what you do, right? There's some people that would say, oh, well, geez, if I was in healthcare and I was a nurse and I was directly helping people, well, then maybe that's something that's somehow better. And I kind of think of it as everything that we do, we can do for the glory of God, right? Because no matter what that is, somebody could say, well, but that person, they're just pouring concrete. Well, architects, if somebody's not pouring concrete, we're not building buildings, right? That fellow who is, has the sanitation engineer with the garbage truck, guess what? Place isn't going to look too good if somebody's not doing that. But doing that for the glory of God, thinking about your role, thinking about the example that you can set in everything you do has an enormous impact, right? So yes, we're going to be very, very sensitive, to what's going on in the world, but when we ask the question, who's really going to deal with this stuff? I really believe the answer is us, right? I would really, really encourage people to literally stop talking about those guys, those men or women, and realize we are those guys, okay? Now, as my students at Kellogg know, I'm capable of going on for 3 or 4 hours, okay? But what I thought I would do after 15 minutes is I'm going to stop here and entertain any questions, any thoughts that you have, and on any of these topics or things that I didn't get into, and have a good open discussion. Because as I said, I have no answers, but I have many, many opinions. Okay, so I know I was supposedly a very active group, so questions of any kind here. Yes, maybe your name, what you do, so everybody will get to know you. So here's the mic here for you. Perfect.
My name is Tabitha DeFrancisco. I'm a management consultant. My question is, how do you balance all of this very metric-driven culture and the expectations that employers have on us with the values? Because sometimes they do conflict. There's such a drive for my profession to get the right sales, which leaves often little time for me to really coach and develop people, which is what I'm passionate about and where my value lies.
Great question. Okay, so this is a big part of leadership. What was your first name again? Tabitha. So this is a great question, because in leadership, and truly being, in my mind, a value-based leader, very often people start with, okay, how do I lead my team? You know, I have 2 or 3 people that I'm leading, or 5 people or whatever, and how do I want to manage those? Or people will think about, how do I deal with my peers, right? You know, you don't work for me, I don't work for you, we're at the same level, but how to help one another out? And people kind of figure that out. The most difficult thing, and the thing that many people don't like to talk about, which I appreciate you bringing up, is how do you deal with the people above you, right? How do you deal with the boss who he or she either doesn't get it, what the things we're talking about, they don't want to get it, or they just look at it in an economic way that they don't really care about the things that we're talking about at all. And that, in my mind, is where I think about this topic that I refer to as the ability to learn how to lead up, right? Lead up. Because what you have to do somehow is you have to demonstrate to your boss that you're going to do a good job. Okay, I'll try to role play that you're my boss, okay? You're my boss, and that's important, but I've got to figure out a way to let you know, way beyond words, that yes, I'll get the job done, but I've got a bunch of other things that are very important to me, okay? And if I can demonstrate the fact, oh, Harry's not one of these people who's not going to get the job done, or Harry doesn't really care. No, Harry cares, but he also cares about his relationship with God. He cares about his family. He cares about developing other people. And I have to figure out a way to convince you that I can do both of those. I can do all of those. And I think very often, I believe that involves being able to relate to your boss in a big way. So here's a little model for you. I start at the very top and say, leadership, if you think about it, has absolutely nothing to do with titles and organizational charts. Leadership is the ability to influence people to do things. And the only way I know how to influence people is you have to be able to relate to people, right? So if I can figure out a way to relate to Leah, then I think maybe I can influence her. If I can influence her, I can lead her, right? So once you realize it isn't just a case of who reports to who, right? I have to then be able to demonstrate to you, yes, you're my boss, I'm going to do a good job, but I'm going to convince you that I've got to do these other things as well. And my view is, very often, a boss may act in a way where some of the things that you're saying occur because they're a little worried, yeah, but will she really get the job done? But to demonstrate, no, I'll get the job done, but guess what? I'm going to do it in a certain way, and some of these other things are very important to me. And I kind of look at it as, if I really take the time, I can very often convince a boss that, but you know what? Maybe I can't. And if I can't, then I've got to ask myself, is that where I want to be? Is that where I want to be, or should I go someplace else? And I think praying about your vocation and what you do, I think becomes very, very important. Because again, to be honest, and I see this with a lot of very bright people, they get themselves into a profession, but have they really thought about, is that what they really want to do? You know, one of the big benefits, I think, of self-reflection and prayer is that it minimizes the surprise. In fact, I tease folks that, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but most of us can figure out whether somebody is self-reflective and prayerful by talking to them for about 15 minutes. And people say, well, how would you know that? Well, here's what I've realized. People that are not self-reflective and prayerful, they're always surprised. They're always surprised. And you're surprised, they're surprised. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. Here's the way this works. Right? I'm at O'Hare Airport the other day. I meet a student, a former student of mine. Hey, Joe, how are you doing? Well, Professor Kraemer, I'm just really surprised. What are you surprised? Well, I now have 2 young daughters. I have no relationship with my 2 daughters. I'm just really surprised. Well, do you spend time with your 2 daughters? No, I don't spend any time with them at all. Well, you're surprised. I'm surprised you're surprised, right? In fact, well, you may want to do this. Later today, tonight, tomorrow, if somebody says to you they're surprised, you should just say, oh, why are you surprised? They're going to tell you why they're surprised, and you're going to say to yourself, I'm surprised you're surprised, okay? And I'll tell you, this happens all the time. And maybe you've seen this with your friends, right? I'll be in New York, right? I'll see a former student. How are you doing? I'm just really surprised. Well, what are you surprised by? Well, you know, I'm working 100 hours a week. I'm traveling 95% of the time. I haven't seen my spouse. I haven't whatever. And I'm going to say to myself, well, didn't you know that when you took that job? I mean, did you think they were paying you that ridiculous amount of money and that you wouldn't be traveling? Now, if you said to yourself, you know what? Hey, my career is more important than my relationships. My career is more important than my relationship with God, whatever. Now, we may not like that, but at least the enormous benefit of that is the person won't be surprised. The number of people walking around that are surprised is surprising, okay? So you really got to think through, is the profession I'm headed toward what I really want to do? Will I be able to balance the things that are most important to me by doing that job, okay? Then once you're in it, then you say to yourself, okay, do I have the ability to lead up and in a respectful way, let my boss know how this is going to work. And if it isn't going to work that way and I can't impact it, you know what? Life's too short. Life's too short. I think you got to find the right place, would be my opinion. That's why I would say those are opinions. Make sense? What else? Yes, ladies first, always here. What's your name? Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Kristen. I work in the IT sector for a large retail pharmaceutical company. And I know this is not my passion, and I'm trying to figure out and develop my spiritual gifts. So I'm wondering, how did you identify yours, and how are you developing them as you grow in your career?
Sure. Well, great question. So this is where I really believe, and I spend time with almost 4 or 5 students every day thinking about this, is literally taking the time to figure out what you're called to do. And I really believe a lot of that does come through prayer and self-reflection, right? Because then you say to yourself, okay, are there certain things that as I pray and think about that are talents that I've been given that he wants me to use, right? I always think of that, you know, the story of the talents, right? Okay, what are there certain talents he's given me that I really believe he would like me to use? And then based on that, are there certain things I'm passionate about? And then are there certain things that I feel like I'm drawn to, right? And I'll give you a couple examples. For those of you that are literally thinking about careers and what you think you may want to do in the future, here's a couple, they're always simple, because I keep things simple so I don't confuse myself. But here's a couple techniques on this, okay? One thing is I'll talk to some young folks and they'll say, I really don't know what I want to do. I just don't know. And I'll say, okay, well, think of taking a sheet of paper and putting a dot in the middle. And you dot in the middle and you say, I don't really know. Do I want to go north, south, east? I don't know what I want to do. I really don't know. Well, then I say, all right, here's a great way to start. What do you not want to do, right? And I'll just make it up. Somebody says, well, I certainly, am not financially oriented. I don't like numbers. Okay, let's cross all that off, okay? Well, I don't really feel myself having a skill set on sales or something. Okay, and interestingly enough, you start eliminating the things you don't want to do. It starts to make it simple. What are the things that you may want to do, right? Here's another crazy one. I was mentioning to a student yesterday. Crazy, simple concept. You're not sure what you want to do, right? Take a big sheet of paper, and you make 3 columns. The first column is, what do you love doing? And it isn't just work-related things. It's fun. It's fun. What do you love doing, okay? Next column is, what would you rather not do? You could do it. In fact, maybe you may be pretty good at it, but you'd rather not do it. right? And then the third column is, what are the vocations, careers, whatever, that maximize the first column and minimize the second column, okay? Now you got me rolling here. I'll give you one more. This is kind of a crazy one, but it seems to work for some people. Anytime any of you have to go to a dentist, I don't know why, but every dentist I've ever been in, there's like 3,000 magazines in these dentist offices. I don't know how they get all these publications, right? But you get there, and you're there for a 10 o'clock appointment, and you get in there, and the first thing they say is, we're running behind, we can't take you till 11. And you forgot your iPhone, you forgot your briefcase, and you've got an hour now, okay, and there's a million magazines. So I tell the students, what magazine do you pick up? What articles are you interested in? Okay, I would go to the dentist, and for some reason, I always would want to read about healthcare. Boy, how do you deal with this healthcare cost? How do we actually make people more productive? How do we move as a country? We don't really have healthcare. We have sick care. We wait until we get sick. Okay, how do you improve people's lives? How do you minimize having 35% of the population obese? I'm just like, wow, I was really fascinated by that, right? But I would start to read an IT article. I just couldn't make heads or tails of it, okay? So thinking about where you're drawn to, what do you think you may be passionate about? And then I think through prayer, are there certain things that you feel he's calling you to, right? I always felt that because I had some very strong values that I thought were very important, and I really felt a passion for trying to be an example for other people. So I decided, rather than being in a profession where, I may have 2 or 3 people working for me, I really love the idea that I could manage hundreds or thousands of people. Because I thought, boy, if I really would like to change people's behavior, I think if I could be an example for more people, that would be great. And that's why I love doing what I did in healthcare. And I think the reason I love teaching is, in teaching, you can have an enormous impact on other people. God bless you. Make sense? Yeah. Yes, sir. Here you go.
My name is Brad. I have a background in sales, and I'm just wondering, I'm guilty of separating my faith from my profession and not bringing it into the office. I'm wondering how you've gone about incorporating conversations around God in what you're doing. Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, this, and what's your name again? Brad? So Brad, I think this is one of the most important things to constantly think and pray about, okay? Because I would say opinion, I personally don't think, if you're really focused on what he's asking us to do, I don't think you can separate this, right? But for me, it's a balance. I mean, one of my major principles is all about balance, right? It's a balance. So I really believe I'm called not to separate this, but at the same time, I do feel the responsibility to be respectful of what other people believe. But I often think to myself that if I'm given the opportunity to give my opinion, or Harry, what do you think, or how do you look at this? In a very, very respectful way, I'll say, well, Brad, this may not work for you, but this is how I think about this. This is what this means to me. And what I find very interesting is, if you do it in I don't know the best way to describe it, I don't know the word I'm looking for, Brad, but if I do it I guess I'll just say in a respectful way, that this is what works for me, this is what's important to me, I realize it can have a big impact on other people. I'll give you a good example. So when I give talks, and I'm actually going to Notre Dame today at 11 o'clock. When I'm giving a talk at Notre Dame, or St. Thomas, or Marquette, or whatever, and the entire group are all Christians like we are today, I'm just very, very direct, right? Now, to be respectful, when I'm at Northwestern, okay, I will be a little indirect, but I wait for the opportunity for somebody to ask me the question. So I'll give you an example. When I talk about leadership at Northwestern, I will immediately talk about the importance of self-reflection and knowing yourself. Almost immediately, some student will say, well, how do you do that? I said, well, for me, it's all about prayer. And for me, it's literally taking the time to do a nightly self-examination of my conscience. And they'll say, well, what do you do? I said, well, what I do is I will sit down, and it's sort of based on Ignatian spiritual life. I will ask myself, what did I do today? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? All right? Am I doing what God's asked me to do? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And if I have tomorrow, being fully well aware that sooner or later I won't, but if I do have tomorrow, based on what I learned today, what do I think he's calling me to do tomorrow? And people say, well, how often have you done that? Well, I started doing that when I was in college. I ended up going on this Jesuit retreat, and I do this Jesuit retreat for 3 days of silence every year. Well, it's like, well, tell me more about that. And it's amazing to me, Brad, that I said, well, you know, this may work for you, may be something very different. But what gives me, and the whole reason I love teaching is, after that class, usually that night, I will get 2 or 3 emails from students that'll say, you know, I haven't been to church of any kind since I was in high school. Could I come and talk to you? And I think to myself, wow, getting one of those, that's all I need to fire me up for the next day, okay? But I realize, Brad, again, this is my own, I would say, opinion. You know, I'm very well aware that some of the folks in that class may be Muslim, they may be atheist, they may be agnostic. And you know what? I found for myself that being incredibly direct didn't really attract as many people, right? So I want to be sensitive. I want to demonstrate the fact that, by the way, particularly if you're my boss, this is what drives me. But by the way, I will end up selling more than anybody else on the team. See, sometimes people think this is something to do with I'm not going to perform. Oh no, I'm going to be a phenomenal performer for you, okay? But it's part of who I am, and I'm going to do my best not to separate it. Make sense? Yeah. What else? Yes. All right.
Thanks. My name is May. I'll keep it real quick. I'm a technology lawyer. So how does one strive to do one's best, be really successful, be really good, like what you say, a phenomenal performer, without becoming unconsciously embroiled in personal ambition?
Without, was the last part?
Without becoming embroiled in personal ambition.
Ah, okay. Well, you guys ask great questions. So the way I think about this, and again, there's a reason I always say opinion, because I'm not really sure what the answer is, okay? The way I think about this is, and this is a little my own personal prayerful reflection, is I am incredibly well aware that I'm here for a blink of an eye. All right, you know, when you're younger, there's this view of, you know, hey, you know, okay, he's talking about how fast life goes by. No, it happens very quickly. All right, I'm teaching at Kellogg now, right? And I say, well, when did I graduate from Kellogg? Well, it was a few years ago. No, it was 40 years ago. And I tell my wife, I went from 22 to 62 like that. I mean, it's just like that. Okay, because I'm in this classrooms I was in. Feels like it was last week. No, it was 40 years ago. So I told my wife, Julie, I said, Julie, it went like that. I said, think about that. If I snap my fingers again, I'd go from 62 to 102. She said, let's not talk about that. No. Why not? Let's talk about it. That's reality. Now, so once I realize I'm here for a blink of an eye, all right, then in my mind it's all about what example can I set the short time I'm here. Now, if I'm doing well, I'll do well, but I'm never going to get caught up in the whole materialism thing. See, because usually the doing well is sort of the accumulation of money or assets or something, usually, right? Well, I was very, very lucky because when I was a child, my father had a big impact on me. And my father had all these crazy sayings. I don't know where he stole them from, but one of my favorites was, he said, have you ever seen a hearse, you know, the car with a coffin in it, have you ever seen a hearse with a coffin in it going to a cemetery where there was a U-Haul attached to it? And I said, Dad, what do you mean? He goes, well, Harry, most people either think all of this stuff they're collecting is going with them, or they must think they're living forever. Because if you realize you're here for a blink of an eye, and it's very interesting, when you're younger, you start collecting all this stuff, right? And then you see these guys, sort of our age, you're like buying a bigger house, and then all of a sudden, like they're 80 years old, they're trying to figure out how to give all this stuff away because they're going to die. You say to yourself, well, if you realize how short it is, maybe just putting this all in perspective, right? My father used to say, hey, if you've done well and you want to buy yourself something, fine. But he always used to say, never be possessed by your possessions. And if you think about it, and I'm sure you guys may have seen these studies, it's fascinating to me that there is this bizarre view when we're young, well, boy, you know, the more money I have, boy, the happier I'm going to be. And they've done these studies where they basically show that after somebody has, pick a number, but $70,000, $80,000, you're not happier because now you're worried about all this stuff. You know, I'll be at the office and somebody will say, how you doing? Well, I'm just really concerned. What are you concerned about? Well, you know, the house I have in Aspen, the roof's caving in. Well, guess what? You know, there's like 1 billion people that aren't eating every day, and you're worried about your roof in Aspen? You know, what are you talking about? So in my mind, if you get over the fact that I'm blessed, I've got certain talents, I'm going to do well, but guess what? If it turns out that I end up doing well, well, then that's more money that I can give away. That's more other things I can do. So separating out what you gain by working from what you're called to do, I think helps a lot with that process. Because an awful lot of people get very caught up in they want more, they want more, they want more. Now, if you've got certain talents and you want to do well and you're doing it for the glory of God, well, that's fantastic. But I think a lot of it is figuring out a way to put it in perspective. That's the way I think about it. Yes?
My name is Jason, former consultant. I'm actually an incoming Kellogg student.
Oh. Beautiful, beautiful. When do you start?
I already started, I guess.
Right now? Is this right now?
Yeah.
The night program? Or?
2Y program.
Oh, great. Well, I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you. I thought it was a great question about how you balance work and spirituality, but how do you do that with your spouse and figuring out what is your right path in relationship to hers so that you guys are one?
Oh boy. Okay. No, this is another one of my favorite questions. So, are you married? Oh. You're not sure? You're not sure whether you're married? You seem a little confused. Okay. So the way I think about this is, and it's so great you brought it up, because in a longer version of a talk, in addition to talking about self-reflection, what are my values, what are my purpose, spending a little time alone, that's step one. Step two, if you're blessed to have a spouse, if you're blessed to have the right person, you immediately are going to want to have these discussions together, right? You just don't do this alone. And in fact, the way, what my wife Julie will often say to me is she'll say, hey, Harry, based on the way you operate, you could convince yourself of anything. Do you want to know what I think? Now, the answer to that question is always yes. You may not think it's yes, Jason. The answer is going to be yes, always, right? And it's beautiful because you can share and say, okay, Tanya, you know what? Here's some things that are really important to me value-wise. I'd like to get your thought. Well, let me give you the range of reactions you could get from her. Here's a range, right? One end of the range is really beautiful. One of the range is, hey, Jason, thanks for sharing that. Thanks you for sharing it. But you know what? I've known you for several years, and based on your actions, I could have guessed what your values are. I mean, you're like right in sync. Now, the other side, Jason's a little scarier, right? The other side is when she says, wow, based on your actions, I'm amazed you're deluded enough to think those are your values. I mean, you're like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, okay? And finding people to share that with is huge, is huge. And if you're blessed to find the right person, and by the way, Jason, it's kind of funny. When I first started teaching, I thought that most of what I'd be talking about would be, leadership and business. But every time I meet with students, they will ask some fascinating questions, right? I had this one young woman who said to me, hey, I've got this boyfriend. I'm literally trying to think whether he's the right guy, and I'd like to get your opinion. I'm thinking, whoa, my opinion. I said, what do you mean? She says, well, how do you know? It was kind of an interesting question. She said, how do you know if it's the right person? And I thought, well, that's a great question. So I said, well, here's an opinion, like this opinion. And I was thinking about my relationship with Julie, and we've been married, for 38 years. I thought, how do you know? And I realized one way of thinking about it is two pieces, and it deals with self-reflection and prayer, I think. First piece is, you literally cannot picture your life without that person. I mean, you can't pick, because part of your values and part of what's important for you on your life journey the next 50 years is that person really completes and helps me get there, right? And she kind of nodded. And I said, now here's the other one. I said, the other one is, and I don't articulate this well, Jason, but here's the concept, is that you care so much about that person and what's best for that person that making that person happy is more important than you being happy, right? And it's interesting because it's not like you're being selfless. That's what really makes you happy. That's what makes you really happy. It's like, hey, hey, Julie, do you want to go to the movies or do you want to go to dinner? And I really want to go to the movies, right? What do you want to do? She says, oh, I really like to go to dinner. That's what I want to do. I mean, I really do, because that's what makes her happy. And at that point, this young woman said, this is definitely not the right guy. Okay. I felt a little bad about that, but, makes sense? All right, great. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Kraemer. I actually took your class in leadership at Kellogg in 2005.
Oh, here we go.
I'd be surprised if you don't remember me as your star student back then. But
Peter was my best student. He was a remarkable guy. I think about him all the time. What do you do, Peter?
Awesome. God bless you. I'm an executive pastor. For the last 3 years, I was in the corporate world up until then for about 16 years. Yeah.
That was my first year, too. You must have been my first class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, wanted to follow up on, you taught this class on leadership, and I remember you talking a lot about servant leadership, and this one being one of your core values. And just if you could flesh out for us, like, what does that look like in practical terms? I think it's almost an oxymoron. Like, how do you be a servant and a leader at the same time?
Perfect, Peter. And thank you, Peter. What were you doing right when you graduated?
I was working at GE Capital doing commercial real estate lending.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Okay, I got a great way, Peter, to think about this. And some of you may have studied or heard about this. Some of you may not. But this whole topic of servant leadership. And to your point, Peter, is a little bit of, wait a minute, are you leading or are you being a servant? And I'll give you two ways and then a little story that'll be helpful, because this is a great one. That the best leaders realize that they don't get people to do things because they work for them. They get people to do things because it makes sense to do. And you convince them of that, right? So if Bob and Jackie and Lindy work for me, I think in some businesses the view is, okay, hey, Jackie, this is what I want you to do. And that's it, because you're going to do it because you work for me. Well, no. You don't want to be a leader through power because I've got this title. You want to be the leader because I'd say, hey, Bob, you know what? Given the situation, I think this is what we ought to do. What do you think? And when Bob says, well, Harry, yeah, you think you want to go east on this. Boy, for the following 3 reasons, I really think we ought to go west. You know what, Bob? Forget what I said. Yeah, let's go west. Because if you're a really good leader, as you know, Peter, you have no need or desire to be right. You're very, very focused on doing the right thing. Okay? Now, the best way, Peter, of describing this servant leadership thing, and I don't know if when you were in my class, I had this fellow as a guest speaker. But by the way, does anybody work for Northern Trust Bank here, by the way? Oh, you work at Northern Trust? You work at Northern Trust. Okay, small world. Well, one of my classmates at Kellogg was Rick Waddell, who was the CEO up until a couple months ago and is now retired, Peter. And what he did, and I thought this was really great, this is such a great example. He tells a story in my class where he says, when he was sort of a lower middle-level guy, he got a call from the CEO, Wes Christopherson. And he called him into his office and he said, Rick, what I want you to do for me is I want you to draw the organizational chart for the Northern Trust. Could you draw the chart for me? And as I'll try to do this as he does it, it's a little hard with the microphone, but he said, I took out a piece of paper and I drew the chart. And I put at the top, I put, the CEO at the top, the square, and then right below that, I drew a line and I put the 4 executive vice presidents, right? And then each one of those 4 have 10 people working for him, and this whole thing, expands. And he starts drawing it, and he's about halfway done with this chart, and Wes said, okay, no, let's stop a minute. You got most of it right, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the chart, okay, with me at the top and working way down, and what I want you to do with the chart, I want you to flip it 180 degrees. Because here's what really happens. I'm the CEO. I work for these executive vice presidents who work for these folks, who work for the tellers, who work for our customers. And in any kind of business, if we're going to do it right, the customer is at the top of the chart, okay? Now, Yes, I have to make some difficult decisions, but my whole focus, if you're one of my vice presidents, is what can I do for you, Peter, so that you can help the team so that we can serve customers? And I thought, that's a great way of thinking about it. But unfortunately, as we all know, in a lot of organizations, people get a title, they get power, and they think, well, you're going to do things because I'm the boss. And that has nothing to do with the basis of being what I call a value-based leader, or some would call a servant leader. Make sense? That's the best example. He does that every time he teaches the class. Rick Waddell. Yes? Okay, good. I think we're out of time. So the last comment I'd make to everybody is no pressure. No pressure on anybody here today. But I do feel the need to remind you, okay, that you are those guys. Okay? So good luck. Okay?